This is Hendrick Tallardar with the January Nullsec recap. Early into the month, N3 Coalition member Darkspawn saw all of their SOV in Wicked Creek drop as the Alliance disbanded thanks to a disgruntled director. The CEO of Allied Front, an English-speaking corporation within the Russian alliance, returned from time away from the game to see the Russians, quote, abusing English speakers. Unhappy with this and other issues within the alliance, the CEO decided to use an alt in Darkspawn's Executor Corp to disband the alliance altogether. This move left much of the Wicked Creek region up for grabs, but N3 alliances, along with the assistance of Pandemic Legion, easily took the region back under control. The Darkspawn alliance name was also taken by Alt Corporation of Get Off My Lawn, a CFC member, leading many to believe that this was an attempt by the CFC to destabilize the region. The following day, in Vale of the Silent, a combined fleet of Test Alliance Please Ignore It and Insidious Empire clashed with a fleet composed of Clusterfuck Coalition members. Test and EMP had been attempting to invade the region when a fleet of Dreadnought-class ships belonging to Gentleman's Agreement, a member of the CFC, were attempting to reinforce a player-owned structure in NCGR-Q. Test and EMP promptly dropped their Slowcat fleet, assuming that Gents had no support. This, however, was not the case, as CFC members Goonswarm Federation sent in a response fleet that trapped the Test and EMP capital ships. The battle was fairly one-sided as 200 CFC pilots assaulted 60 Test and EMP pilots stuck in the system. Not long after that, 4 supercarriers belonging to N3 members The Kadeshi fell to a Russian fleet. The supercarriers have been noted to routinely operate at the same time of day for several days in a row, most notably without any further support. This predictability in their behavior, and the lack of support, made them an easy target for the Russians, and a trap was laid. Knowing the rough time frame that they operated in, the Russian forces joined with CFC members for an operation. This was noted by N3 members Northern Coalition and their allies Pandemic Legion, but the reasoning was lost on them. They had been unaware that the Kadeshi had been operating so predictably and without any backup. When the Kadeshi jumped into a system to attack some carriers that were laid out as bait, the Russian and CFC forces quickly swarmed and took them down, unbeknownst to N3 members. On January 18th, the N3 and PL forces attacked the system of HED-GP in the Catch region. This strategic system was the gateway into Russian-controlled area of the region and provided important logistics, as the system was one of the few Nullsec systems to have a Stargate that led straight to a high-security space. What many did not expect, however, was that members of Provi Bloc, a coalition of Providence region dwellers and neutral parties in the war thus far, attacked the Sinojammer belonging to the Russian forces in the system. Given the dismissive view numerous alliances have towards Provi Bloc, this went without much notice or care by the Russian forces. Pandemic Legion, though, took this opportunity to reinforce the infrastructure hub and all player-owned structures in the system. While doing this, they also brought in their carriers for the eventual fight. Thanks in part to poor timing, the attacking forces of Pandemic Legion were able to set up their own structures in the system, specifically around all 7 of HED-GP's moons. As all parties were aware of the upcoming fight, fleets began to form just a few hours before the final timers finished. As the timer ticked down, people began to notice something was wrong. The server was showing 10% time dilation, with only a small number of those expected to be involved in the fight in the main system. It was also noted that the CFC staging system of G-0Q86 in Curse was also in 10% time dilation. That was when CCP mentioned that due to an error in allocation of resources, both systems were on the same server node. Quickly, the G-0Q86 system was taken offline briefly to move it to a different server node, while the CFC forces had already formed and were awaiting the command to attack. Once both systems were cleared by CCP to be good to go, thanks to putting them on the different servers, the battle then begun. One would think that this is where things got interesting. However, that was not the case. The servers simply could not handle the influx of pilots into the system as CFC and Russian fleets attempted to attack the N3 and Pandemic Legion fleets who had been waiting in HED-GP for the timer to finish. As the CFC and Russian forces first jumped their subcapital ships in, mostly comprising of Dominixes, the server stability became problematic, especially when the Dreadnought ships attempted to jump in just afterwards. Many of the Dreadnoughts simply could not load the grid to begin firing on their targets. However, they were visible to the N3 and Pandemic Legion ships, and to put it simply in a metaphor, they were the fish that sat in the barrel. Several hours into the fight, and still unable to effectively use their Dreadnoughts and other capital ships, the Russians and CFC fleets stood down. In the days after the fight, CCP released a dev blog apologizing for the issues and explaining what exactly caused the problems experienced. It was also at this time that diplomacy struck between Pandemic Legion and the Clusterfuck Coalition. The Accords, formerly known as Botlord, specifically focus on the two entities' rental empires. Both entities agreed to several terms, such as not forming an organized raid on the other's renter systems. These agreements also reinstated their agreement not to attack each other's sovereignty systems. The effect of this on the Halloween War is somewhat important, as it limits where the CFC can field their fleets and what regions they're able to attack. Some of the regions that fall under the Accords are also regions that are being specifically targeted by the Russian forces. 2 days after the Botlord Accords were announced, Insidious Empire redeployed to the Galactic Southwest, focusing on the Delve region. Their goal was to primarily attack Solar and Black Legion sovereignty in the Quarius region, except that they would not be attempting to take sovereignty like they had attempted in Veil of the Silent. The campaign in Veil of the Silent was halted as CFC were outnumbering the Test and EMP forces in the fights, and they had decided to reshift their focus. The next major battle also became one of EVE Online's most important events. In the system of B-R-5RB, a system located in the Amencia region, Pandemic Legion had recently begun staging their war effort from there. Their recent move to the system did not go unnoticed, but not much resistance was mounted by the Russian and CFC, as Amencia as a whole had been firmly under N3 member Nullsec's control. However, on the fateful day of January 27th, exactly 1 year after the Battle of Asakai, a supposed error occurred. The Sovereignty Bill was due to be paid. This bill is a regular fee built into the game by CCP for players to manage their sovereignty control. Supposedly, the auto payment had been set up and it was fine to go, but the sovereignty was still dropped. This quickly caused both sides of the war to scramble and gather their fleets for a fight. The next 21 hours saw a massive capital ship fight that no one can do justice in summarizing. For nearly a day, the N3 NPL forces clashed against the CFC and Russians. The battle primarily saw the CFC and Russians fully commit their Titans and Super Capitals to the battle, which had not been seen up to this point in the war. This then led to a total of 75 Titans falling in battle. Destroying 59 Titans belonging to N3 and Pandemic Legion alone, the CFC and Russians were able to claim victory and secure the system, trapping Pandemic Legion's trillions of ISK in the form of assets. In the following days after the fight, Insidious Empire had announced that they would be returning to the drone regions, effective immediately. Leader of the group Freeze stated that for the next week the Alliance would be on stand-down, stating that after this period he would then be taking control of the next campaign, though it would be dependent on several factors. Most notably, Freeze stated that in his analysis the Halloween War had just recently been lost due to the recent fighting. This concept was only further assumed as Pandemic Legion reached another agreement with the CFC and were granted permission to remove their trapped assets in B-R5RB. Following this, Pandemic Legion would then withdraw from the southern fighting. Citing that Pandemic Legion had lost roughly 4.5 trillion ISK, the decision was made to regather themselves for a bit and then move forward. Not long after, it was announced that N3 member Nullsec would be evacuating all of Amencia and removing any vital assets from the region, effectively giving it up to the Russian and CFC forces. According to some, the Battle of B-R was the fight that essentially won the war for the Russians and the CFC. After months of fighting, it's not unlikely that many involved are tired and teetering on the edge of being burnt out. While the N3 Coalition and their allies Pandemic Legion had arguably been on the brink of breaking the Russians, the final days of January flipped the positioning. As the month came to a close, it's unclear how much longer this war will last, but it's still very much alive. For more EVE Online news, visit thematani.com.